Welcome to Sci-Fi Alien, where the unknown meets the extraordinary. Today, we dive into a gripping tale of power, betrayal, and a revolution that could reshape an entire world. Kalira, a princess, turned hero, must confront an enemy who's been hiding in plain sight. But the question remains, can she reclaim her throne and save her people before it's too late? Stay tuned to find out. The echo of a shrill cry tore through the quiet hallways of Nexus 7. Dr. Asher Hayes, the station's only veterinarian, jolted out of his chair, the usual hum of his monitors suddenly drowned out by the sharp, panicked sound. He stood frozen for a moment, his mind racing. There was no one else around, the corridors were dimly lit and empty, save for the occasional passing security drone. But the cry, it was something else. It wasn't the sound of any animal he'd ever treated, and it certainly wasn't a distress call any human would recognize. Without thinking, Asher grabbed his medical kit and sprinted toward the source. The maintenance corridors were dark, the air thick with the usual scent of oil and machinery. His boots clicked sharply against the metal floor, echoing his urgency. As he turned a corner, he saw it, the beast. It lay crumpled near the emergency airlock, its massive form sprawled across the floor like a broken piece of art. White striped fur, now matted with dark, crimson blood, caught the dim light. Its labored breathing came in ragged gasps, barely audible against the steady hum of the station's failing systems. The creature's eyes were wide open, flicking nervously, pupils dilated with pain. Asher's heart skipped a beat. "What happened to you?" he whispered, bending down. He had seen his fair share of injured creatures, from the smallest rodents to the most bizarre alien species that passed through Nexus 7, but nothing quite like this. The beast's body was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Its frame was muscular, built for something far stronger than the normal creatures he treated. Asher reached out tentatively, his hands shaking slightly as he checked its pulse, finding it weak but steady. "You're alive," he murmured, more to himself than to the animal. He couldn't help but feel a surge of hope. This creature, whatever it was clearly important. But what had left it in such a state? What could hurt something so magnificent? And why was it here, of all places, on a station like Nexus 7? His mind raced as he pulled out his scanner and activated it, sweeping the creature's body. Nothing came up in the database. The scans didn't match anything known in the station's system. This wasn't a common animal, it was something alien, yet strangely familiar. He couldn't explain it, but the way it looked at him, there was intelligence behind those eyes, something deeper than simple animal instinct. Asher swallowed, his curiosity piqued beyond reason. "All right, stay with me," he whispered, more to calm himself than the creature. Asher carefully scooped it up into his arms, his muscles protesting at the creature's unexpected weight. Despite its injuries, it didn't feel fragile, it felt powerful. Asher moved swiftly through the corridors, the station's maintenance lift groaning as he stepped inside. The lift descended, rattling slightly as it took him down to the third level. Asher glanced down at the creature in his arms. "You're one of a kind, aren't you?" The beast's eyes flickered to his face, its breathing shallow. For a moment, Asher thought he saw something in its gaze, something almost human. He couldn't help but pause, his breath catching in his throat. It was as though the animal was trying to communicate. He shook his head, telling himself it was just his exhaustion playing tricks on him. When the lift finally reached its destination, he hurried to his clinic, the familiar sterile environment a welcome sight. Asher quickly placed the creature on the examination table, trying to steady his shaking hands as he prepared to treat it. The overhead lights flickered on, casting a cold, blue glow over the room. "Let's figure out what you are," Asher muttered, more to himself than to the creature. He began the full xenobiology scan, his eyes scanning the data as it appeared on the monitor. The system whirred to life, offering no answers. Instead, the scan returned with a cryptic result: unknown species. Closest match, Phileta sapiens, variant 78% confidence. Phileta sapiens. Asher frowned, confused. He knew the species, they were humanoids from the Sinus Quadrant. Sentient, aristocratic, and powerful. But this wasn't a humanoid. This was an animal, with no human-like features beyond the intelligence in its eyes. Phileta sapiens. Asher repeated, his voice thick with skepticism. This is no sentient being. He reached for a regenerative gel pack, applying it to the worst of the wounds. The creature let out a low, strained growl, its body stiffening under his touch. It was clearly in pain, but Asher couldn't afford to hesitate. The wound near its side was deep, likely caused by an energy weapon of some sort. Asher applied pressure, doing his best to stop the bleeding as the scanner continued its analysis. Then, the beast's eyes snapped open, startling amber flashing against the black sclera. It hissed, its fangs glinting dangerously, and Asher instinctively jerked back. The claws on its paws flexed, digging into his forearm, and Asher winced, his blood mixing with its. "Easy," Asher said, his voice low and steady. "I'm not going to hurt you." The creature stilled for a moment, its sharp gaze locking with his. Asher could feel the weight of its stare, something primal and calculating in its depths. It was studying him, analyzing him in the same way he had been analyzing it. He slowly, carefully, administered a mild sedative. "Just enough to help you relax," he whispered, his fingers working swiftly. As the sedative took effect, the beast's muscles gradually relaxed, and it sank back into the table, exhaling what almost sounded like a sigh. "Good," Asher said softly, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. He carefully cleaned the remaining blood from its fur, his thoughts racing. Whoever or whatever this creature was, it wasn't just another patient. There was something more here, something bigger at play. The scanner beeped, signaling the completion of its analysis. Asher leaned in to examine the results. What he saw made him pause. The creature's internal structure was fascinating: multiple hearts, reinforced skeletal structure, neural pathways suggesting high intelligence. But it wasn't just the physical aspects that caught his attention. It was the knowledge that this creature had been engineered for something greater. It was no accident. Asher leaned back, his thoughts spinning. "What are you?" he whispered to the still, breathing creature. Whatever it was, whoever it belonged to, it wasn't just an innocent animal. This was something else entirely. And he had no idea how much deeper this mystery was about to go. But then, the creature's eyes flickered open again, and Asher's stomach dropped. This time, it wasn't the exhaustion from the sedative that made its gaze less intense, it was the awareness, the almost human recognition. It knew. It knew exactly what was happening. And somehow, in that moment, Asher knew too. His life was about to change in ways he couldn't even begin to understand. As Asher stood over the creature he had saved, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, not just in the beast but in himself. Since NYX had arrived at his clinic, wounded and close to death, there had been an unspoken connection between them. At first, Asher had chalked it up to the natural empathy that came with his work. He had spent years tending to creatures of all kinds, each one with its own story, its own pain. But with NYX, it was different. Something about this creature made him feel like he was no longer just a caretaker. It was as though they were bound by something more, something unseen. As the days passed and NYX's condition improved, the bond between them only grew stronger. Asher could feel it in his bones, the subtle tug of awareness that drew him to the creature every time he stepped into the clinic. It wasn't just the quiet intelligence in NYX's eyes or the way it instinctively trusted him. It was as if NYX was trying to communicate in ways beyond what Asher had learned through his years of training. One evening, as Asher cleaned the medical equipment, his thoughts wandered back to the strange moment earlier in the week. NYX had locked eyes with him, and for a brief moment, it felt like time had stopped. It wasn't just the stare, it was the understanding behind it, the silent exchange that passed between them. Asher shook his head, trying to dismiss it. He was tired, overworked, and under too much pressure to read into something as intangible as a bond with a creature. But the truth was, he couldn't shake the feeling. That night, as he sat beside NYX's recovery chamber, the quiet hum of the machines filling the air, the creature stirred. Asher looked over, watching the amber eyes flicker open. He couldn't help but smile, even though he knew it was foolish. "You're awake again, huh?" he muttered softly, his voice laced with a tenderness he hadn't realized he'd developed for this strange, otherworldly animal. NYX blinked slowly, and for a moment, the two of them simply stared at one another. The creature's breathing was steady now, though it still sounded labored, like it was fighting to regain full strength. Asher leaned closer, resting his arms on the edge of the chamber. "How do you feel?" To his surprise, NYX let out a low growl, though it wasn't hostile. It was more like a question, a response, a recognition of him. Asher chuckled softly, despite the seriousness of the situation. "Yeah, I get it. You're not the talkative type." The creature's amber eyes fixed on him again, this time with a slightly different intensity, and Asher felt a twinge of unease in the pit of his stomach. It wasn't just the physical wounds that made this creature so intriguing, it was something else, something deeper. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the medical scanner. As he adjusted the settings to monitor NYX's vitals, he couldn't help but notice that the creature seemed to be watching him more intently than ever. "Is there something you're trying to tell me?" Asher asked, though the question felt silly the moment it left his lips. After all, he knew this was just an animal, right? But then, something shifted in NYX's expression, and Asher felt a jolt of electricity run up his arm as their gazes locked. A sudden thought flashed in his mind, and he froze. Could it be? Could the creature be trying to communicate with him? The idea seemed absurd, yet the intensity in NYX's gaze made him pause. "What are you?" he whispered, more to himself than to the creature. It was a question he had been asking ever since NYX had come into his care. To his surprise, NYX's eyes softened, the creature's body settling as if it had finally found some peace. The moment lasted for a long stretch of silence, the only sounds the steady rhythm of the machines and the soft breathing of NYX. Suddenly, a soft pulse of energy seemed to vibrate in the air, and Asher's breath caught in his throat. He felt it, a pulse of something deeper than just the normal physical presence of the creature. It was like a signal, an invisible thread tugging at him, pulling him closer to the beast. He shook his head again, trying to push the thought away. He was a scientist. A veterinarian. He wasn't in the business of supernatural occurrences or mystical bonds. But that connection, he could feel it, and it was unlike anything he had ever experienced before. "Are you trying to tell me something, NYX?" he asked softly. The words felt almost foolish, but there was something in the air, something unspoken, that made him feel like the answer was just out of reach. NYX's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, the creature's paw twitched, reaching out toward him. Asher froze, a thrill of unease running down his spine. He reached out cautiously, his hand trembling. The moment their hands touched, it was like an electric shock. He felt it immediately, a pulse, a current, an exchange that went far beyond anything physical. His breath caught in his throat as the connection deepened, as though a door had opened, and something from the other side had poured into him. What is this?" he gasped, pulling his hand back instinctively. But NYX didn't pull away. Instead, it seemed to be waiting, its gaze unwavering, studying him. For a moment, there was nothing but silence and the pounding of his own heart. And then, like a distant whisper in his mind, Asher felt a thought, a fleeting emotion. "Help me." It wasn't words, but the sensation was as clear as day. Asher's eyes widened in shock. "You can understand me," he whispered. NYX didn't respond. Instead, it slowly lowered its head, as if tired, its body relaxed against the table. But Asher, his mind racing, couldn't shake the feeling that something had just changed, that whatever he had stumbled upon was far beyond his understanding. The air felt charged, and for the first time since the creature had arrived in his care, Asher wondered if he had become part of something much larger than himself. The bond between them was not just one of medical necessity, or even empathy. It was something more, something ancient and unexplainable. And just as quickly as it had begun, the moment faded. NYX's breathing deepened, its eyelids fluttering shut. Asher stood frozen for a long moment, his heart still pounding in his chest. He felt the weight of the creature's presence, of whatever force had just passed between them. "Help you," he whispered again, as if to reassure himself. But how? He took a deep breath, standing up straighter as he gathered his thoughts. Whatever this was, Asher knew one thing for certain: his life had just become far more complicated than he could have ever imagined. And as he watched NYX sleep, a new question rose in his mind: what exactly had he just become involved in? The hum of the station, once a constant presence, felt oddly distant as Asher stood at the observation window of his clinic, staring out into the endless void of space. His mind was still reeling from the moment of connection he had experienced with NYX. The creature's eyes had locked onto his, and for a fleeting instant, it felt as if they were bound by something deeper than just the need for medical care. He had dismissed the thought earlier, it had to be fatigue, he told himself. But now, after what had just happened, he couldn't ignore the feeling that this animal was not just another patient. It was something more. He glanced back at NYX, still resting in the recovery chamber, its breathing steady, but Asher couldn't shake the sense that something was off. What was NYX really? And why did it feel like it was waiting for him to discover something he hadn't yet understood? His thoughts were interrupted by the sudden chime of his comm unit. Asher's hand hovered over it, hesitating before he answered. It was a message from Commander Taro. He braced himself, wondering what the latest protocol change was. "Dr. Hayes, you're needed in the docking bay. A diplomatic vessel is arriving. You're to assist with the medical check-in." Asher frowned. Diplomatic vessels didn't usually come to Nexus 7. It was a backwater station. Nothing about it screamed important. but a diplomatic ship was coming, and it was apparently important enough to involve him. "I'll be right there," Asher replied, his voice even, though his mind was already racing with questions. When Asher arrived at the docking bay, the atmosphere felt tense, charged with an energy he wasn't used to. He saw several security personnel standing guard, their faces stern and watchful. The ship that had landed was sleek and intimidating, its markings unmistakable, the crimson and gold insignia of the Theia Dynasty. His stomach dropped. He knew that emblem well, even if he had never encountered it in person. The bay doors slid open, and there she stood, Baroness Kalira. Asher froze. Her eyes were the same amber as Nyx's. They locked onto him immediately, as if sensing his presence in the crowd. For a moment, he simply stared, struck by the intensity in her gaze. She wasn't just a ruler, she was something more, something that commanded respect without a word. There was a power in her stance, but it wasn't just the power of authority. It was the power of someone who had been shaped by years of hardship, who had endured battles most people couldn't even fathom. Asher took a step forward, but his legs felt heavy. "Dr. Hayes," her voice broke through his fog of thoughts, smooth and deliberate, like she had already calculated his every move. "I need to speak with you. Now." They walked together through the sterile halls of the station, the silence between them heavy with the weight of unsaid words. Kalira didn't seem in a hurry, though she was clearly focused. Asher tried to focus on the task at hand, but everything about her radiated an aura that kept pulling him in. "I understand you've been taking care of something very dear to me," Kalira said, her voice soft but firm. Asher's heart skipped a beat. He didn't need to ask what she meant. It was Nyx. He had known it the moment she stepped off the ship. "Yes, I've been treating Nyx," Asher said, keeping his voice steady. "But I still don't understand what." "Nyx is not just any creature," she interrupted, her gaze sharp now, focused directly on him. "You've been helping a creature who carries with him the weight of a royal bloodline." She paused for a moment, studying Asher closely. "I owe you a great deal for saving him. But you must understand, Nyx is more than a companion. He is a symbol of my family's legacy, and his safety is crucial not just for me, but for the entire Theia dynasty." Asher blinked, stunned by the implications of her words. "Symbol of a royal bloodline," he repeated, trying to grasp the full meaning. "But he's just an animal, isn't he? A sentient one, maybe, but—" "No," Kalira cut in firmly, her voice cold as ice. "Nyx is more than that. He is a companion in the truest sense. He is an extension of my power, of my family's lineage. He carries our legacy, and in turn, we share a bond that goes beyond what you might understand." She stopped in her tracks and turned to face him. "What I'm telling you, Dr. Hayes, is that by saving Nyx, you have unwittingly become part of something far bigger than you could have ever imagined." Asher struggled to comprehend what she was saying. The words didn't seem to fit together. A royal legacy? A beast that was more than just a creature? It was almost too much to process. "Why is he here, then?" Asher asked, his confusion obvious. "Why is he on Nexus 7? This station, it's not exactly a place for royalty." Her gaze softened, a flicker of something almost regretful in her eyes. "It was never my choice for Nyx to be left here," she said quietly. "But I had to make decisions, and sacrifices, for my people. There are factions within my court, forces that wish to see me removed, who would see NYX destroyed to cripple my reign before it even begins. She turned away from him, her expression hardening once more. NYX is the key to everything. He is the last remaining living symbol of my mother's rule, and there are those who would stop at nothing to destroy everything she built, including him. They don't just want me out of power, they want to erase all evidence that my family ever ruled. Asher felt a chill run down his spine as he processed her words. So, he's not just a pet, is he? He whispered, the gravity of the situation beginning to settle over him. Kalira nodded slowly, her eyes locking onto his. No. He's the one thing that keeps me grounded, the one thing that can prove my legitimacy, my right to rule. Her voice faltered slightly, but she quickly regained her composure. And now, because of your care, because of what you've done, they'll be coming for you, too. Asher's mind spun, the realization sinking in. This was no simple rescue. He had unknowingly placed himself at the center of a political storm, a storm that was as much about survival as it was about power. And you? Asher asked, his voice barely above a whisper. What do you want from me now? Kalira turned back to him, her eyes now full of something unexpected, vulnerability. I need your help, Dr. Hayes. I need you to protect NYX. Protect him like you've been doing. But understand, this isn't just about an animal. It's about saving my legacy. My people. My future. For the first time since meeting her, Asher saw Kalira not as a powerful baroness, but as a woman who had been forced into a position she never asked for, a leader who was fighting against impossible odds. Her plea was simple, yet it carried with it the weight of a kingdom on the verge of collapse. I don't know if I can do that, Asher said softly, his eyes meeting hers, searching for any sign of a lie. I'm just a vet. Kalira smiled, but it was a sad, weary smile. We're all just one thing until we become something else, Dr. Hayes. And with that, the world Asher knew began to unravel. He had gone from treating animals to protecting royalty, from a quiet life to standing at the precipice of a political war. But no matter what happened next, one thing was clear, he was now part of something much bigger than himself. And the future, uncertain as it was, would demand more than he had ever expected. After Kalira's revelation about NYX and the immense responsibility he now carried, Asher found himself caught in a web he hadn't anticipated. What had started as a simple act of compassion for an injured creature had now escalated into a life-altering involvement with the Theia dynasty. But even as they forged a tenuous alliance, Asher could feel the weight of the truth bearing down on him, something Kalira had yet to tell him. The unspoken tension hung between them, unacknowledged but palpable, and Asher knew that the calm before the storm could only last so long. A few days passed, filled with endless discussions of strategy, of the unrest brewing in the Theia court, and the threat of assassination that loomed over Kalira's life. But something felt off. There was a distance in Kalira's demeanor, an air of secrecy that Asher couldn't ignore. Her words were always measured, calculated, and yet, at times, he caught her glancing at him with an unreadable expression in her ember eyes. As if she were waiting for him to ask the right questions, or perhaps, not to ask at all. One evening, as Asher finished his rounds in the clinic, he received a private message from Kalira, requesting an urgent meeting. His heart sank. This was it, the moment she would finally tell him the truth about everything that had been left unsaid. When he arrived at her quarters, Kalira was pacing near the window, the faint light from the station's atmosphere casting long shadows across her face. Asher stood still for a moment, watching her, sensing the weight of her thoughts. Her back was turned to him when she spoke, her voice low, but tense. Dr. Hayes. I need to tell you something. It's important. Something I should have told you sooner. Asher felt his pulse quicken. He stepped into the room, his gaze never leaving her. What is it, Kalira? His voice was cautious, though his mind raced. He had known that there was more to the story, but now, standing in the quiet of the room with her, the reality of what that might be settled uneasily in his chest. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. I've been hiding things from you. About NYX. About what's truly happening in the Theia court. She paused, then took a deep breath. And about Commander Taro. Asher's mind flashed to the commander. He had always respected Taro, trusted him as one of the few figures on Nexus 7 who had authority and integrity. But Kalira's words cut through that trust like a knife. Taro. Was he involved in this? What do you mean? What's going on? Kalira looked away for a moment, her eyes clouded with something that could only be described as regret. Taro has been feeding information to my enemies. He has been working with the factions that want me out. The people who will stop at nothing to see me fall. Her words came slowly, each one heavier than the last. I didn't want to believe it. I trusted him, too. Asher's chest tightened, the shock of her confession hitting him like a cold wave. Commander Taro, he repeated, almost disbelieving. But, he's one of the few people I thought I could trust here. He's been loyal. Kalira's eyes met his, dark with the weight of the truth. He was. At least, I thought so. But loyalty has its limits, especially when power is at stake. Asher's mind raced, trying to reconcile the man he had known with the betrayal Kalira was describing. Are you sure? How do you know? He asked, trying to understand. How could you have not known? Because I didn't want to see it, Kalira admitted, her voice barely a whisper. I kept telling myself that it was just paranoia, that I had enough enemies already. But Taro's actions have been growing more suspicious by the day. I began to notice the little things, the messages that never reached me, the sudden appearances of his agents around the station, the coded communications I intercepted. She sighed, rubbing her temples. It's been happening right under my nose, and I didn't want to believe it. Asher stood there, processing her words, trying to make sense of everything. So Taro's been working against you all along? He's been feeding information to your enemies. To the people who want NYX, he stopped himself, realizing where the conversation was headed. Kalira nodded. Yes, they want him. NYX is my family's legacy, and if they can control him, they can control me. That's why they've been trying to get him. And why, now, they'll come for you as well. The silence between them hung heavy, and Asher's mind began to process the enormity of what Kalira had just confessed. What does Taro want? Why would he betray you? What's in it for him? The questions tumbled out, but Kalira didn't immediately answer. She was still staring at the floor, her hands clenched at her sides. Taro's motives are personal, she said quietly. He's always had ambitions, but he never had the courage to seize power for himself. Instead, he's playing the long game. He wants to be on the winning side, no matter who that is. He's been passing information about my moves, my strategies. He's trying to undermine me, trying to weaken my position before I can make any real progress. Asher's thoughts turned over rapidly. This wasn't just a political game. This was about survival. Kalira's life was at stake. NYX's life was at stake. And now, even his own life was on the line. The tension between them was palpable, and Asher felt a knot twist in his stomach. So now what? What do we do about this? He asked, his voice sharp with urgency. Kalira straightened, her shoulders squared with determination. We have to confront him. But not yet. Not until we have everything in place. He thinks he's playing both sides, but we have the advantage now. We know he's working against us. We just need to be patient. We'll wait for the right moment, and then we'll expose him. Asher met her gaze, his mind still spinning with the weight of her words. The trust he had placed in Taro was shattered. The station was crawling with enemies, with hidden forces plotting against them. And now, Kalira's trust had been shattered as well. Kalira's voice softened. I didn't want to bring you into this, Asher. But now you're part of it. You have to understand what's at stake here. This isn't just about me. It's about everything I've worked for, everything my mother stood for. I can't afford to fail now. Asher swallowed hard. I understand, he said, though the words felt heavy. This was more than he ever signed up for. But in that moment, standing beside Kalira, he realized that there was no turning back. He had made his choice. And now, they were in this together. The moment of quiet resolve hung between them, but the storm was far from over. Asher knew that the path ahead would be dangerous, filled with betrayals, deceptions, and more twists than he could ever have imagined. But for the first time since meeting Kalira, he felt a sense of certainty. No matter the cost, he would stand by her side. After all, this wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about fighting for something worth saving. The conversation with Kalira had left Asher's mind in turmoil. The betrayal by Commander Taro, someone he had trusted, cut deeper than he expected. Now, they were forced to play a dangerous game of cat and mouse with people who could be hiding in plain sight. Kalira's words echoed in his mind, we have to be patient. Wait for the right moment. Yet, in the silence that followed her admission, Asher felt a growing unease. There was no more waiting, no more hiding. Kalira's enemies had grown too bold, and soon, they would come for her, for them all. Asher's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden noise from the hallway, a soft thud against the door frame of the clinic. He turned quickly, his hand instinctively moving toward the medical tools that doubled as weapons in times of desperation. But before he could act, the door slammed open, and a group of armed guards poured into the room. Their uniforms were distinctly different from the usual station security. These were special forces, the kind that didn't ask questions. Kalira didn't flinch. She stood motionless beside Asher, her ember eyes flashing with recognition, but there was no fear in them. Asher's heart raced. They're here. The realization hit him like a punch in the gut. Commander Taro's betrayal had caught up with them. The game had started, and it was no longer a question of survival. It was a fight for their lives. Dr. Hayes, a cold voice interrupted his thoughts. It was Taro's voice, but it was distant, distorted by the cold professionalism of his men. Baroness Kalira. It's time to end this. Asher's breath caught in his throat. Taro. He had been in league with Kalira's enemies all along, but to see him here, leading this attack, it felt like the ground had shifted beneath him. Kalira didn't flinch. You've made a grave mistake, Taro, she said, her voice unwavering, as though she had been expecting this moment for days. Taro stepped forward, his face a mask of stone. I've made no mistake, he said, his voice dripping with cold disdain. You were always a liability, Kalira. You were never fit to rule. He turned his gaze to Asher. And you? Just a pawn. You're in way over your head. Asher's pulse quickened. You were behind all of this? The attacks on NYX, on Kalira? You're the one who sold us out? Taro smiled, but it wasn't a smile of victory. It was the smile of someone who had been playing a much longer game. It's not just about you, Dr. Hayes. It never was. It's about power. The Theia dynasty will fall, and when it does, we'll have the pieces in place to take its place. Kalira stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. You think this will be easy, Taro? You've underestimated me, and you've underestimated the loyalty of those who still stand with me. Taro's eyes narrowed. Loyalty? Is that what you call it? He motioned for his guards to step forward. We'll see who remains loyal when you're gone. The tension in the room grew thick, almost suffocating. Asher's mind raced. He needed to think, to act. There were too many guards in the room. He could never take them all on alone. And Kalira? Kalira couldn't fight back, not with the state she was in. He needed a plan. What do you want from us, Taro? Asher asked, trying to buy time. His fingers brushed against the tools on the counter, his mind calculating his options. Taro chuckled darkly. What do I want? I want control. I want to end this little rebellion before it gets any further. And you too, you're the last pieces in my way. Asher's heart pounded in his chest, but his voice remained steady. You think this is over? You think you can just waltz in here and take everything? Taro's eyes flashed with irritation. You really don't get it, do you? It's already over. You're just too blind to see it. In a split second, the tension snapped. Asher moved before he even knew what he was doing, his body reacting on instinct. He grabbed a surgical blade from the counter, the cold steel gleaming in his hand. He flung it toward one of the guards, hitting him in the shoulder with precise accuracy. The man let out a shout of surprise, stumbling back. The room exploded into chaos. Kalira, as if awakening from a trance, swiftly moved toward the door, her hand reaching for the small hidden weapon at her side. The guards hesitated for a moment, taken off guard by the sudden shift, but then they regained their composure, advancing on them with raised weapons. Get down! Kalira shouted to Asher, ducking behind the desk for cover as the guards opened fire. Asher scrambled, his heart thundering in his chest, adrenaline surging through him. He dove behind the medical counter, narrowly avoiding the incoming fire. The weapons were high-tech, and the energy beams seared through the air with deadly precision. Asher's mind was focused, calculating the angles. Kalira was right, this wasn't just about survival anymore. This was a fight for everything they believed in, a fight for Theia's future. And it wasn't going to be one sitting idly by. Stay down! Asher shouted, motioning for Kalira to stay low. He could feel his muscles tense as he took in their situation. They were trapped, with no immediate way out. But then he remembered something, the maintenance tunnels. The hidden passages that ran beneath the station, just behind the clinic. He had used them for emergencies before, but never like this. We can't win this fight head-on, he muttered, more to himself than to Kalira. We need to get out of here. Now. Kalira glanced over at him, her face hardening with determination. There's a way out. But we have to move fast. She grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the far side of the room where the hatch leading to the tunnels was hidden. As she opened it, a blast of energy hit the wall near them, sending sparks flying. Asher winced, feeling the heat, but they had no choice. They had to move. "We can't just run," Asher said, his breath heavy. "We need to finish this. We can't let Taro win." Kalira's expression was resolute. "We will," she said quietly, "but not here. Not now. We need to live to fight another day." Together, they ducked into the maintenance tunnels, leaving behind the chaos of the clinic. Asher's mind was racing, but his thoughts kept coming back to the betrayal. Taro had known all along, but now it was too late. The fight wasn't just about protecting NYX or Kalira anymore. It was about taking down a man who had used them all for his own gain. And Asher would make sure Taro didn't get away with it. The tunnels beneath Nexus 7 were a dark labyrinth of forgotten spaces and hidden passages. As Asher and Kalira sprinted through them, the sound of their footsteps echoed in the narrow corridors, their breath coming in quick, ragged gasps. The ambush in the clinic had forced their hand, and now they were running, not just for their lives, but for something bigger. Kalira's kingdom was in chaos, her enemies closing in from all sides. And Taro's betrayal had only intensified the danger. "Keep moving," Kalira whispered, her voice strained but determined. "They'll be looking for us at the exits." Asher didn't need any encouragement. His mind was reeling from the battle, from the moments of chaos, and from the sharp realization that the stakes were higher than he ever imagined. They weren't just running from their enemies, they were running toward an uncertain future. The plan, whatever it was, wasn't clear yet. But Asher knew that Kalira's vision of a just and peaceful Theia couldn't die here, not in the heart of Nexus 7. There had to be a way to turn this around. They reached a small maintenance hatch, and Kalira paused, pressing her ear against the door. Asher stood behind her, heart pounding. They had no time to waste, but every move had to be calculated. The stakes were too high for mistakes. "There's a secure transport tunnel just ahead," Kalira said, glancing back at him. "If we can reach it, we'll have access to the outskirts of the station. From there, we can slip past the blockade and get to the communications room." Asher nodded, taking a deep breath. "Let's go then. We can't afford to waste any more time." The two of them moved swiftly, their bodies close, but their minds consumed with the same thought: survival. As they turned a corner, a loud crash echoed behind them, a telltale sign that they weren't the only ones in the tunnels. They were being pursued. The enemy was already hot on their heels. Kalira moved faster, her eyes scanning the path ahead, while Asher's mind raced. His thoughts drifted back to the choice that had haunted him ever since he found NYX. Why had he gotten involved in all of this? Why had he taken the risk to protect Kalira and NYX, when he could have simply walked away and continued his quiet life as a vet? His hands tightened into fists. He knew the answer. It wasn't just about saving lives. It was about standing up for something, for a cause, for a future, for a better Theia. Suddenly, a group of guards rounded the corner ahead of them, blocking their escape route. Asher cursed under his breath, his body instinctively moving into a defensive stance. Kalira, quick as ever, pushed him behind her, the glow of her weapon flickering to life in her hand. "We're not going down without a fight," Kalira said, her voice steady, but there was an undercurrent of something desperate in it. "Not a chance," Asher replied, his heart hammering. They had no backup, no time to think. Their only option was to fight their way out. The first guard lunged at them, his weapon raised. Kalira reacted in a flash, disarming him with a swift, practiced motion. Asher's mind barely registered the move. His own hands moved without thought, grabbing the nearest weapon and aiming it at the approaching guards. The energy blasts fired in quick succession, lighting up the dark corridor. Asher's aim was true, but there were too many of them, and he knew their chances of survival would diminish the longer they fought. Kalira shot him a brief, questioning glance, her eyes fierce with resolve. "We can't keep doing this, Asher. We need to get to the transport room, now." He nodded, understanding the urgency. But they were surrounded, trapped in a corner of the tunnel. Asher's chest tightened. They were running out of options. "Go," he said, his voice firm. "I'll cover you." "What?" "No," Kalira snapped, her eyes narrowing. "We move together. Always. There's no time." Asher shouted. He knew the risks, but this wasn't just about escaping. This was about protecting Kalira's future, NYX's future, and everything they had worked for. "You have to get out of here. I'll hold them off." Kalira looked at him, her eyes softening for a brief moment. Then she nodded, understanding the sacrifice he was willing to make. "I'll make sure this wasn't in vain," she whispered. Without another word, she turned and darted toward the transport tunnel, her footsteps swift and determined. Asher didn't hesitate. He fired another blast at the advancing guards, his heart breaking with the knowledge that this could be the last time they saw each other. As Kalira disappeared into the darkness, Asher held his ground, blocking the way with a final, defiant stand. He could hear the sound of footsteps behind him, the enemy was closing in. But there was nothing he could do. His only hope was that Kalira would survive and carry the mission forward. He had given her the chance to escape, and now, it was time to pay the price. As the guards closed in on him, Asher's thoughts turned to NYX. The bond between him and the creature had deepened in ways he couldn't explain, but it was clear now. NYX wasn't just an animal. He was part of something much larger, something that had always been part of Asher's fate. As he took a final breath, a sense of peace washed over him. He had chosen this. He had chosen to stand for something greater than himself. And if it meant giving his life to ensure the future of Theia, then so be it. The guards were almost upon him. Asher raised his weapon one last time, ready to face whatever came next. He didn't know if Kalira would succeed, or if NYX would be safe, but he knew one thing: he had done everything he could. And in the end, that would have to be enough. The sound of blaster fire and footsteps faded as Kalira ran through the tunnels, her heart heavy with the weight of the sacrifice Asher had just made. She had made a promise to him, and she would keep it, no matter the cost. The revolution wasn't over. It was just beginning. After Asher's final sacrifice, Kalira was alone. The weight of his loss pressed down on her chest as she sprinted through the dark, damp tunnels beneath Nexus 7. Each breath was harder than the last, each step further driving home the reality of what she had just lost. Asher, the only person who had stood by her in the most uncertain of times, was now gone. His last words echoed in her mind: "We can't let Taro win." But Kalira wasn't someone who could wallow in grief. Not now. She had a responsibility, to her people, to her family's legacy, and to the future of Theia. Asher's sacrifice was not in vain. It couldn't be. He had fought for her survival, and now it was up to her to ensure his sacrifice wasn't forgotten. As she rounded another corner, her hand brushed the hidden access pad beside a large maintenance panel. The wall slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a small, dimly lit chamber. Kalira stepped inside, momentarily catching her breath. She leaned against the wall, eyes closed. She had to regroup. She couldn't afford to make any mistakes. A soft chime from her comm device interrupted her thoughts. She flicked it on, her hands trembling slightly as she swiped to answer. "Kalira, we're waiting," a calm voice came through the comm link. Kalira straightened, instantly recognizing the voice. Commander Lyra. She had been one of her mother's most trusted officers, a fierce and loyal warrior who had stayed behind after the coup, quietly working to gather support in the shadows. Kalira had hoped for a moment like this, but to hear it now, so soon after the ambush, sent a shockwave of relief through her. She wasn't alone. "I'm here," Kalira replied, her voice firm, though her heart was still racing. "Where?" "Ravik's men are everywhere. We have to move quickly." "Get to the rendezvous point," Lyra instructed. "We have a few allies waiting for you." Kalira nodded, even though Lyra couldn't see her. "I'm on my way." She didn't waste another moment. She moved through the access tunnels with a newfound urgency. Kalira's mind was still on Asher. His bravery in the face of certain death had been the push she needed to keep going. But now, she couldn't afford to linger on his loss. She had to focus. She had to survive, for the both of them. As she reached the rendezvous point, Kalira found herself standing before a small, inconspicuous storage room in the lower levels of the station. The door slid open to reveal Lyra, standing with a small group of soldiers, loyalists who had been working in the shadows to keep her cause alive. "Baroness," Lyra greeted her, bowing her head slightly. "We've been expecting you." Kalira didn't waste any time with pleasantries. "How many?" she asked, her eyes scanning the room. She could sense the tension in the air, the urgency in the quiet exchanges between the soldiers. "5, Lyra replied, her voice low. "We've made contact with some of the other noble houses. They're ready to move, but they need your leadership. We'll need to act quickly if we want to stop Ravik before it's too late." Kalira clenched her fists at her sides. Ravik. The traitor who had orchestrated the coup. The man who had killed her mother, who had stolen everything from her. And now, he was trying to finish what he had started, to eliminate any trace of her family's rule. She had to stop him. No matter the cost. "We're not going to just sit here," Kalira said, her voice icy with resolve. "We strike now. We take back what's ours." The soldiers exchanged uncertain glances, but Lyra stepped forward, her eyes hard with determination. "We've been waiting for this moment. If we act, we'll have the element of surprise." Kalira turned to face her, her gaze sharp. "Then let's surprise them." Lyra nodded, then turned to the others. "Prepare the weapons. We leave in 5. As the group of soldiers began to gather their gear, Kalira took a moment to steady herself. The weight of what they were about to do settled over her like a cloak. They were going up against Ravik and his forces, the very ones who had turned Theia's world upside down. But Kalira was no longer the reluctant princess hiding in the shadows. She was the rightful heir to the throne, and it was time to reclaim her birthright. "We can't let Ravik have Theia," she whispered to herself, clenching her fists in determination. "This is for Asher. This is for my people." Just as the group was preparing to leave, a new voice interrupted. It was a voice Kalira didn't expect to hear so soon, but one she had hoped for. "You're not alone in this." Kalira turned, her eyes widening in surprise as she saw a familiar figure step from the shadows. It was one of the nobles she had reached out to in secret, Lord Avon, a high-ranking official who had been a silent supporter of her mother's reign. "Lord Avon," Kalira said, taken aback. "I thought you were still in hiding." "I was," Avon said with a slight smile. "But I've heard the call. We're with you, Baroness. And we're not the only ones." The words struck a chord deep within Kalira. For months, she had believed that the coup was a done deal, that her people had abandoned her. But hearing these words, seeing the allies she had fought to keep close rallying around her, sparked something inside her, something that had been dormant for far too long. "You have allies," Avon continued, stepping closer. "We'll make sure you have the resources you need. Together, we can take Ravik down." Kalira nodded, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and resolve. This was the beginning of something more than a rebellion. This was the turning point. The people of Theia would not stand by and watch their home fall into the hands of a usurper. "I'll lead," Kalira said, her voice steady and sure. "We do this now, before Ravik can fortify his position. And when we do, we will rebuild. Theia will rise again." The soldiers around her gathered their weapons, and as the small group of nobles and soldiers moved out of the room, Kalira felt the strength of their shared purpose. The fight was far from over, but now, for the first time in months, she could see the way forward. With unexpected allies at her side, Kalira knew that the path ahead would be difficult, but she would never face it alone. And they would win. The weight of the coming battle pressed heavily on Kalira's shoulders as she and her small group of loyalists made their way through the winding corridors of Nexus 7. Their plan was simple: get to the station's central hub, infiltrate Ravik's command center, and take control. Yet, the more Kalira focused on the task at hand, the more she realized that something was missing, a crucial piece of the puzzle she had never fully explained to her allies. It wasn't until the tight silence of the tunnels engulfed them that she realized it was time to share the truth. As they navigated through the maintenance passages, Kalira's mind was torn between strategy and an overwhelming need to confess, to make her true mission known. Asher's sacrifice had illuminated the stakes in a way nothing else had. There was no more time to hide behind the throne or pretend that she was merely fighting to reclaim her birthright. The real battle was much bigger. It always had been. She slowed her pace, letting her hand trail along the cold metal walls. The flickering lights overhead cast long shadows, but it wasn't the darkness that weighed on her, it was the burden of the truth. She couldn't carry this alone any longer. Asher had trusted her. Now, she had to trust her allies. Turning to Lyra, who was walking beside her, Kalira spoke in a quiet voice that was barely above a whisper. "There's something I haven't told you. Something you all need to know before we go any further." Lyra's sharp gaze met hers. "What is it, Baroness?" Kalira stopped walking, and for a moment, the weight of her decision to speak seemed to hold her in place. The air was thick with the tension of the coming battle, and Kalira could feel the lives of everyone around her hanging in the balance. "I didn't just come back to take my throne," she said, her voice firm yet filled with the weight of years of hidden pain. "I came back to change Theia, to transform it. My mother and I were working on something, a plan for the future of Theia. But Ravik, and the people who helped him take the throne, they couldn't allow that. They're not just fighting for power, they're fighting to keep things the way they are. To keep Theia divided, stagnant, and shackled by old traditions." Lyra looked at her, confused but clearly listening. "What are you saying, Kalira?" Kalira took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words settle on her like an old coat. I'm saying that Theia's future is not about the throne. It's about creating a new society, one that breaks free of the rigid class systems, the isolationist policies, and the dynastic rule. I've been working for years to build alliances with other systems, other species. If Ravik stays in power, everything we've built will collapse. The system will remain corrupt, and Theia will never evolve. Lyra blinked in shock. You've been building alliances with other species? Without telling anyone. I had to, Kalira admitted, the pain of her secrecy evident in her voice. The old guard, the nobles who still cling to power, would never accept such a change. So I worked in the shadows, making connections, bringing together those who were also tired of the old ways. It's why I couldn't bring myself to just sit on the throne like a figurehead. If I did that, nothing would change. The people of Theia need something better. They deserve something better. Lyra looked at her for a long time, as if processing the weight of what Kalira had just revealed. Then she nodded, slowly. So, it's not just about taking back what's yours. It's about remaking Theia entirely. Kalira nodded, her eyes blazing with determination. Exactly. If we win this fight, we will not just restore my family's rule. We will reshape Theia into a place where all species are equal, where politics are not ruled by the wealthy elite, and where power is not inherited but earned. But to do that, we need to defeat Ravik and the old regime once and for all. I can't do this alone. I need your help. The quiet moment between them was filled with understanding. Lyra placed a hand on Kalira's shoulder, her voice steady. You have it? We'll fight with you, Baroness. We'll fight for your vision. For all of Theia. Kalira's heart swelled with gratitude, but it was tempered by the reality of what they faced. This wasn't just a revolution for her. It was a revolution for everyone who had ever been oppressed, for everyone who had been held back by the broken system. It was a fight for a future that might never come, but Kalira was determined to make it happen. As they continued down the dim corridors, Kalira spoke again, her voice soft but resolute. I know this isn't what you expected when you joined my cause, but I need you to understand the stakes. Ravik isn't just some power-hungry usurper. He's a symptom of the system that has kept Theia in chains for centuries. He has to be stopped, but we also have to make sure the system he represents crumbles with him. Lyra's face hardened, and she nodded again. We're with you. And we'll make sure the rest of the resistance knows what we're fighting for. They walked in silence for a moment, the weight of their mission sinking in. Kalira could feel the responsibility settling more heavily on her shoulders, but there was no turning back now. This was her path, and the path of those who had rallied behind her. Together, they would tear down the old ways and build something new. They reached the end of the tunnel, where their allies were waiting, and Kalira stopped for a moment, looking back at Lyra and the others. This is it, she said, her voice steady. We fight for a future of equality, a future where Theia's strength comes not from its rulers, but from its people. If we win, it won't just be a new era for me. It'll be a new era for everyone. Lyra's hand gripped her weapon with renewed determination. Let's make it happen, Kalira. Together. Kalira nodded, her gaze focused. Together. They stepped out into the light, ready to face the enemy that awaited them, knowing that the battle ahead would define the future of their world. Kalira's vision of Theia was no longer just a dream, it was a revolution in the making. And this was only the beginning. The weight of the upcoming battle pressed heavily on Kalira's chest. After the explosive revelation of her true mission and the rallying of her allies, the moment had finally arrived. The time for subterfuge and quiet alliances was over. With the loyalists and soldiers gathered around her, Kalira felt the momentum building, yet she knew there was one final card left to play, a weapon so powerful, it could turn the tide of the entire conflict. A weapon hidden for years, kept secret even from those closest to her. It was time to unleash it. Her mind raced as she moved through the corridors of their temporary stronghold, the stolen transport ship. The ship hummed with energy, a far cry from the old regal palaces she'd once known. Now, everything was a shadow of what it had been. But the weapon she had kept secret for so long, that was no shadow. It was her mother's legacy, and now, it was hers to wield. Kalira paused as she entered the small briefing room, where Lyra and the others were gathered. The tension in the air was palpable. They were all aware of what was at stake. There was no turning back. Ravik's forces were already entrenched in the capital, and the rebellion had no time to waste. The weapon was their only chance. Lyra, always the first to speak in moments of urgency, broke the silence. Baroness, we have everything prepared. The ground troops are ready, and the diversion is set. We just need to strike. Kalira looked at her, her gaze intense. Not yet. Lyra's brow furrowed. Not yet? The time for waiting is over, Kalira. Ravik's forces are preparing for their final push. We need to act now. Kalira turned to face the group, her eyes scanning the room, every ally now fully invested in her cause. I know. But there's one thing you don't know, one thing I've been keeping from all of you. A weapon. A last resort. The room fell silent. Lyra stepped forward, her face marked by disbelief and concern. A weapon? What do you mean? Why haven't you told us about this before? Kalira exhaled deeply, her fingers tracing the edges of the map spread out before them. This weapon was created by my mother and her advisors before the coup. It's a device capable of manipulating Theia's energy grid, an energy pulse that can disable entire fleets, level cities, and change the course of any battle. My mother kept it hidden, believing it was too powerful to use unless absolutely necessary. She knew that if Ravik ever took power, he would use such a weapon for his own gain. I swore never to use it, until now. A heavy silence hung in the air as the gravity of her words sank in. Lyra's face softened, her concern turning to respect. And you think this will work? That it will give us the upper hand? Kalira nodded slowly. It's the only way. If we want to take back Theia, to rebuild it into something better, we need to break Ravik's control. This weapon is the key to that. Asher's death still haunted Kalira, but his sacrifice had pushed her to make the hard decisions. She had to do this, not just for him, but for the future of Theia. The people had suffered under the old ways for far too long, and Kalira would not let Ravik destroy everything her mother had fought to build. The moment of reckoning was here, and there was no room for hesitation. I'll take you to the control room, Kalira said, her voice steady. It's not far from here. The journey to the weapons control room was tense, every moment fraught with the anticipation of what was to come. Kalira could feel the weight of the decision bearing down on her. This wasn't just a weapon, it was the power to reshape an entire world, to impose her vision on a people who had never asked for change. They reached a reinforced door at the rear of the ship. Kalira stepped forward and keyed in a complex sequence, the lock disengaging with a low click. Behind the door lay the heart of the weapon, an intricate array of devices connected to Theia's energy grid. It was a sight that struck awe into her heart. This was what her mother had worked to protect, and now it was in her hands. Lyra stepped closer, inspecting the device. Is this really it? Her voice was filled with disbelief, though it was clear that she trusted Kalira's judgment. Kalira nodded. This is it? It's more powerful than you could ever imagine. What exactly does it do? Lyra asked, her tone shifting from disbelief to curiosity. It can manipulate Theia's energy grid, Kalira explained. It sends out a pulse, a massive surge of energy that can either disable or destroy anything connected to the grid. It can wipe out Ravik's fleet, disable his weapons, and level the capital in an instant. It's a weapon of unimaginable power. Lyra looked at Kalira with a mixture of admiration and concern. And you're willing to use it? Kalira took a deep breath. I have to. If we don't act now, we lose everything. If Ravik remains in power, all of Theia remains under his grip. This weapon is our only chance. Lyra nodded slowly, her face hardening with resolve. Then let's make sure we use it wisely. For Theia. Kalira stepped up to the console, her hands trembling as she input the final command. A low hum filled the air, and the lights above the console flickered to life. The weapon's core began to glow, the energy swirling within it, a quiet storm of immense power. Once we activate this, there's no going back, Kalira said, her voice a whisper, as if speaking to herself. It'll change everything. Lyra placed a hand on Kalira's shoulder, her voice steady and unwavering. It's time to change Theia. The power began to surge, the room vibrating with the raw energy coursing through the control room. Kalira's fingers hovered over the final activation button, but just before she pressed it, she turned to Lyra. If we do this, we have to be prepared for the fallout. Ravik won't give up easily. Lyra gave her a reassuring smile. We've already lost so much. We can't stop now. Kalira took a deep breath and, with one final look at the glowing weapon, pressed the button. The pulse of energy was immediate, and the world around them seemed to quake as it sent shockwaves through the station. Kalira closed her eyes, feeling the immense power reverberate in her bones. This was it. The weapon was unleashed, and Theia's future was now in their hands. But the true battle was just beginning. The pulse of energy still hummed through the air as Kalira stood at the control room window, staring out into the distance. The weapon she had unleashed had shaken the very foundations of Nexus 7, but it was only the beginning. The tides were shifting. Ravik's forces, once confident in their control, were now scrambling in the wake of the powerful blast that had disabled much of their fleet. But despite the success of the weapon, Kalira knew that the real battle was still ahead. Baroness, Lyra's voice broke through her thoughts. Kalira turned to see Lyra standing near the door, her face marked by a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The pulse worked. We've disabled their fleet's weapons systems, but they're regrouping fast. Ravik won't give up without a fight. Kalira nodded, her gaze sharp. We're not done yet, she said, her voice low but filled with purpose. Now that we've struck, it's time to take the capital back. We move in before they can re-establish control. We can't let this victory slip away. Lyra nodded in agreement, her hand instinctively resting on the hilt of her weapon. We'll be ready. The ground forces are standing by. But I need to know, how do you want to approach this? We can't afford any more surprises. Kalira's mind was racing, her every thought focused on the coming battle. We'll attack from the east side, through the old industrial district. It's less fortified, and we can take them by surprise. Once we're in the capital, we'll move toward the palace. Ravik will be there. If we take him down, the rest of his forces will crumble. Lyra's eyes narrowed as she considered Kalira's plan. And what about Taro? He's still loyal to Ravik, and he won't hesitate to strike at you if given the chance. Kalira's heart clenched at the mention of Taro. He had once been her closest ally, a man she trusted with her life. But now, after everything that had transpired, she knew she could never trust him again. We deal with Taro when the time comes. First, we have to secure the palace and reclaim Theia. A heavy silence hung between them. Both knew what the cost would be. This battle would not be easy. It would take everything they had, and more. But Kalira was ready. She had no other choice. The final push toward the capital was brutal. The streets were chaotic, the sounds of distant gunfire reverberating through the air as Kalira and her loyalists pushed forward. Her heart pounded in her chest as they neared the palace. It was not just a battle for power anymore. It was a fight for everything her mother had believed in, for everything Theia deserved. As they reached the gates of the palace, the full scale of the battle revealed itself. Ravik's forces were entrenched inside, but Kalira could see the cracks in their defenses. Her pulse quickened as she gave the order to attack. "We go in, full force," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "No hesitation. We fight for Theia. We fight for the future." The soldiers around her surged forward, moving with purpose, and Kalira's own hand gripped the hilt of her sword. She wasn't just leading her people now, she was fighting alongside them, each step taking her closer to the moment of reckoning. As they breached the gates, Kalira heard a familiar voice, one that sent a chill down her spine. "Kalira." She froze. There, standing in the shadows near the palace entrance, was Taro. His face was cold, his posture defiant as always, but there was something different in his eyes. Something that Kalira couldn't place. "Taro," she said, her voice steady, but with a hint of disbelief. "You've sided with him, haven't you? After everything we've been through, you've chosen Ravik." Taro's expression twisted into something between a sneer and a grimace. "You were always too idealistic, Kalira. You thought you could change Theia, but you're wrong. The system is too broken to fix. You'll never win. The people are tired of your mother's rule, tired of your naive dreams." Kalira's heart sank as she listened to the man she once trusted. The man who had stood by her side through so much. And now, he was standing in her way. "You're wrong," Kalira replied, her voice filled with resolve. "The people want change. Theia deserves better than this. It's not about my mother's rule, or mine. It's about the future. It's about a world where we don't have to hide behind power or titles." Taro shook his head, his expression hardening. "You're a fool, Kalira. I've already made my choice. And now, you'll pay the price for yours." He reached for the weapon at his side, his eyes never leaving hers. Kalira's heart pounded in her chest as the realization hit her, this wasn't just a battle for power. It was a personal betrayal. And Taro, the man who had once sworn loyalty to her, had now become her enemy. In a flash, Taro raised his weapon. Kalira reacted instinctively, drawing her blade and meeting his in a clash of steel. The sound of their swords ringing in the air echoed through the palace courtyard. The battle around them raged on, but in this moment, it was just the two of them, locked in a struggle for survival. "You always were the better fighter," Taro grunted, parrying a blow from Kalira. "But you're not strong enough to win this." Kalira's jaw tightened, her grip on her sword firm. I'm not fighting for me, Taro. I'm fighting for Theia. For everyone who's been silenced for far too long. Their blades clashed again, and Taro stumbled back, clearly shaken by her words. Kalira didn't hesitate. She pressed the attack, her movements fluid and swift, the years of training with her mother coming to the forefront. She could feel the weight of Asher's sacrifice behind her, and it pushed her forward. With one final, precise strike, Kalira disarmed Taro, sending his weapon clattering to the ground. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with disbelief and anger. "You'll regret this," he spat, his voice low and dangerous. Kalira took a deep breath, looking down at him with pity. "No, Taro. You're the one who will regret it." With a final motion, she turned away from him, signaling her soldiers to move forward. Ravik's reign was over. The capital was theirs. But the cost had been high. Kalira's heart still weighed heavy with the loss of Asher, and the battle was far from over. Yet, as she stood at the edge of victory, she knew that this was only the beginning of the fight for Theia's future. The final battle was won. But the war for a new world was just beginning. The streets of the capital were eerily quiet as Kalira walked through the once impregnable gates of the palace, now taken by her forces. The revolution had succeeded. Ravik was defeated, his grip on Theia shattered. But Kalira felt no joy in the silence that followed. Instead, a heavy weight sat on her chest. Theia had been freed, but the cost had been high. Standing in front of the palace, Kalira turned to Lyra, who had been at her side throughout this entire battle. "It's done," Kalira said, her voice a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. "But there's still so much left to rebuild." Lyra nodded, her expression hard but proud. "We've taken the first step, Baroness. Now, the real work begins. The people of Theia will need leadership, and they'll need hope." Kalira's gaze softened. "I know. But this time, it won't be about power or bloodlines. It will be about the people. Theia belongs to them now." Lyra gave her a small, knowing smile. "You've earned it, Kalira. You'll lead them into a new era." The weight of those words felt like a burden and a blessing at the same time. Kalira knew she couldn't do it alone. She needed her people. She needed those who had stood by her, those who had fought for the future. But she also knew that the future would not be easy. "We've got a long road ahead of us," Kalira said, her eyes scanning the streets. "But we'll walk it together. For Theia." As she stepped forward, the sun began to set over the city, casting a golden light across the landscape. The new era had begun. And with it, hope for Theia's future.